So let's stop and let's be completely honest about what we just walked through, because it would be easy to reach this point and do what Christians have been trained to do with uncomfortable truth: soften it, qualify it, remind ourselves that every generation has its struggles, reassure ourselves that our church is different, that our pastor is one of the good ones, that Paul was probably talking about someone else's denomination. That instinct, that immediate reach for comfort when truth gets too close, is itself the problem Paul was describing. So instead, let's lay it flat. Paul warned the last days church would be filled with lovers of self. We built a gospel culture where the self sits at the center of the sermon, the center of the worship experience, and the center of what it means to follow Jesus. Purpose, destiny, breakthrough, your season, your story. The self is not at the edges of modern Christian teaching. It is the organizing principle of it. That is not approaching what Paul warned about. That is it. Paul warned about lovers of money, people who treat godliness as a means of financial gain. We produced an entire theological framework, preached from the largest platforms in Christianity, broadcast into millions of homes every single week, that treats financial blessing as the primary evidence of God's favor. We didn't resist this. We packaged it, branded it, exported it globally, made it accessible in every language on every continent. That is not approaching what Paul warned about. That is it. Paul warned about having a form of godliness, but denying its power. We have constructed the most visually sophisticated, technologically advanced, culturally polished version of Christian expression in the history of the faith, while producing generations of churchgoers whose private lives, marriages, habits, and character are statistically indistinguishable from people who have never encountered God. The form has never looked better. The power has rarely been harder to find. That is not approaching what Paul warned about. That is it. Paul warned about itching ears, congregations that accumulate teachers to tell them what they want to hear. We live in an era where a churchgoer convicted by a sermon doesn't repent. They find a new church, where preachers who name sin lose their platforms and preachers who specialize in affirmation fill arenas, where the market determines what gets preached, and the market always, without exception, chooses comfort over truth. That is not approaching what Paul warned about. That is it. Paul warned about people always learning and never arriving at the truth. We have produced a generation of Christians who can navigate theological debate, maintain robust devotional consumption habits, and never miss a Sunday, whose lives show almost no evidence of genuine transformation. That is not approaching what Paul warned about. That is it. Every category, every single one. Not as an extreme edge case, not as a fringe aberration in some distant corner of the church, as the mainstream, normalized, largely unquestioned reality of much of what calls itself modern Christianity today. Lamentations 2:14. The visions of your prophets were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. When the people who were supposed to tell the truth stopped telling it, captivity followed. Paul didn't write his warning as a commentary on a future generation he felt sorry for. He wrote it as a description of what he already saw beginning, and what he saw beginning has arrived. Now we have to be very careful, because everything we just walked through could be heard as a verdict. A final judgment passed on the modern church and everyone sitting inside it. And if that is where this ends, it would be a betrayal of the very letter we have been reading. Because Paul did not write 2 Timothy to condemn the church. He wrote it because he still believed in it. He was in a hole in the ground, facing execution, days, maybe hours, away from being beheaded by Rome. And his final charge to the one young pastor he trusted most was not leave, was not, it's over, was not the church has failed and there is nothing left to do. It was this, 2 Timothy 4:2. Preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage, with great patience and careful instruction. Correct, rebuke, encourage. All three. Not just the one that fills the room, not just the one that gets shared, not just the one that makes people feel good about coming back next Sunday. All three, because all three are what love actually looks like when it refuses to let truth become a casualty of comfort. And then Paul looked back at his own life, not at his platform, not at his influence, not at how many letters he wrote, or how many churches he planted, or how many people remembered his name. He said this, 2 Timothy 4:7, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. The fight, the race, the faith kept. That was the measure. And here is what that means for everyone watching this. The drift Paul described is real. This has not been exaggerated. Every section, every parallel, every indictment lands accurately against the mainstream condition of modern Christianity. That is the honest answer to the honest question we have been sitting with. But Paul never believed the drift was total. He never believed the church was beyond recovery, because God has always, without exception, kept a remnant. When Elijah collapsed in the wilderness, completely convinced he was the last faithful person left standing, God corrected him with a precision that still lands hard today. 1 Kings 19:18. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal. 7,000, unseen, unplatformed, uncelebrated by anyone measuring influence or counting. Attendance, but faithful. And Romans 12:2 is still the call. Not to the church at large, not to the denomination, not to the generation around you, to you. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do not conform, be transformed. The diagnosis is accurate. Paul's warning has been fulfilled, not partially, not approximately, but exactly, in the mainstream condition of modern Christianity. But a diagnosis is only the end of the story if nobody responds to it. Paul wrote the warning and kept preaching. He named the drift and told Timothy to stand against it anyway. He saw everything falling apart around him and called it a fight worth finishing. So the question is not whether Paul was right. He was. The question is which side of the warning you are going to live on. The 7,000 never made the news. They never filled the arenas. They never trended, but they were the ones God said he was keeping. The only question that matters now is whether you are one of them